Welcome to How People Move People, a podcast about the impact that our words, art, stories, and lives have on each other. Each series' journey unfolds in a sequence of 6 episodes. This series, titled Trace Elements, is hosted by Solís, a Honduran Madrid-based culture writer and researcher who explores the impact left by artists, both dead and living, who were impacted by the HIV/AIDS epidemic that continues today. Solís traveled between the Americas and Europe to gather stories of men and trans women. We honor their stories in their first languages, offering half of this series in English and half in Spanish.
My name is Rosalynde LeBlanc, and I also go by Rosalynde LeBlanc Lowe, so one and the same person. And the reason why I say both of my names is because it's kind of talks to both of my roles in the dance world. So as Rosalynde LeBlanc Lowe, I am a professor and the current chair of the dance program at Loyola Marymount University. I have been here for 10 years, and I've been teaching full-time in higher ed for 12 years. And then as Rosalynde LeBlanc, I have had a career in dance that I guess is 30 years, spans 30 years now. And as a performer, of course, in my early career and with touring companies, and then also currently I still dance and perform and choreograph. I also produced and co-directed Can You Bring It, Bill T. Jones and D-Man in the Waters feature-length documentary, really about that bridge kind of between being a former member of Bill T. Jones's company and now carrying his legacy on by teaching his work to college students.
In the documentary, you mentioned that D-Man in the Waters was the piece that made you realize that you wanted to do this for a living. So can you talk a little bit about, do you have any impressions that you can recall of what made you feel that way? If I may, I saw the piece about 10 years ago when City Center did the first part in December of 2013. And what I remember the most, being a complete, dance, I don't know how to, I know how to move. I don't know if I know how to dance, but not knowing much about what was expected of me as an audience member going into a dance performance. What I can remember and what I can recall, and it still gives me goosebumps thinking about it, was the urgency of the work. And with your documentary as context, obviously you fill in so many of the gaps that I felt watching that performance. But enough about me. I want to know what you felt watching that performance that made you go, this is it for me. Yeah. And that memory is so, it's a core memory for me that is still so crystal clear. So I was 16 years old and I had gone to the American Dance Festival in Durham, North Carolina. It was 1989. The background to that is that I was always around dance. My mother was the first woman of color in the original Paul Taylor dance company from 1959 to 1966, Elizabeth Walton. So she had a very distinguished career that I was always around. So I knew this thing called modern, postmodern dance, and I was familiar with it. I started dancing myself with kind of, I would say, more seriousness around the age of 13, but I did not consider it a career. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I was interested in a couple things. I was very interested in music. I thought I might want to be a conductor. I was very interested. I had a very kind of compassionate heart, and I was very compelled by social justice. So I had already gone to quite a few marches on Washington. We lived in Baltimore, so it was not hard to go. I was a member of Students for Social Responsibility. So that's kind of who I was. Then I danced on Saturdays. And so I went to the American Dance Festival that summer. And the first night of the festival was the Scripps Award.
and the Bill T. Jones Company performed. Absence was the first half of that program, a piece called Absence. The second half was D-Man in the Waters. And I felt like I remember where I was sitting in the theater, in the balcony, couple rows up on the aisle, because I was so impressed by this piece. The impression that I got was that these worlds kind of came together on stage. I saw this athletic, vigorous movement to this rhapsodic music. And I felt this sense of solidarity among this group of people that were diverse, not just in race and ethnicity, but in body shape, size, training, right? Someone who's clearly balletically trained with someone who is just, I didn't know it at the time, but an actor who moves, so this true depth of diversity on this stage, yet there was a solidarity and a singularity about their purpose and what they were doing. And I had never seen that in dance before. It wasn't so much about a visual cohesion, like unison. It was a spiritual cohesion, which I would term solidarity, and it made sense to me because it transcended. I think one of the issues I had with dance, I love dance, but I was looking to transcend dance as image and dance as beauty, because I wasn't, first of all, that type of dancer who met those images in the mirror. It's just say, oh, I'm making pretty lines, I look feminine and beautiful, that wasn't happening for me. So it wasn't that drew me. I think my natural interest in the world was challenged when I was in the studio, because it felt like such a selfish kind of endeavor. I now know that it's not, but at that time, perfect your lines and put your arms here and look at yourself in the mirror, and all of that felt very self-centered. And I'm like, but what about the famine in Ethiopia? What about the National Organization of Women? What are we doing for them while I'm perfecting my lines? So I think I had that conflict. And then I saw this piece and it felt like, okay, everything's coming together. Like that I could do, that I can buy into. And it felt like there was such purpose, and it was greater than all of those people on that stage. I had no idea that D-Man was Damien Aquavella, and that he was at that time at home dying of AIDS. I had no idea who Arnie Zane was, and that they had just lost Arnie a year before. I didn't know any of that. It was just the piece. And after the show, there was strawberries, a strawberry fondue pot. And the reason I remember that is because I was standing there dipping strawberries in fondue, and it was this crystal clear aha moment that I'm going to be a dancer because I have to do that dance. It was that powerful for me. It was that much of a pivotal moment.
And I guess everything, like an epiphany of this kind is obviously improved by having strawberries, right, around.
Well, the interesting thing is, I'm reading this book right now, and I just started it, so I really shouldn't rightfully talk too much about it. But The Body Keeps the Score. It is, a classic of nonfiction, of course, and so this idea of what makes a memory absolutely core, like I'll never forget that. The details of dipping strawberries in this. Why did that stay in my mind? How many 40 years later or 35 years later, like I still hold on to, I know exactly what seat I was in. So I think all of that speaks to the fact that seeing D-Man in the Waters went straight into my psychology and my heart. And I became a different person in that moment. And my mind really latched on to it. Yeah. And I'm not exaggerating. It truly, I know it sounds very, very exaggerated and hyperbole, but it really is true. It was a pivotal moment of my young life at that time.
I completely believe you. Like I have some of my favorite movies that I've seen tattooed. I mean, not the movies, but images from the movies tattooed on me. And I have like performances that have marked me, literally marking my body. So trust me, it does not sound like hyperbole. I feel you all the way. This is a question that is asked at some point in the documentary, and I'm really interested in knowing your answer as well. What did you know about HIV/AIDS when you first saw the piece? And let's start with that.
Oh, that's a great question. And you're right. I asked my students that, and I asked myself that. So I'm trying to think. It was about the same time. The person that I remember first hearing the word AIDS from was Eddie Murphy. And I don't remember which. We had the album of his stand-up routine, and I don't remember which album it was, but I remember the line, "AIDS sticks with you like luggage." And then all the raucous laughter from the audience. And I didn't know what AIDS was, and I didn't understand the joke. But I remember that really stands out to me as that was the first time I heard of it. And I'm guessing it may have been around 15, 16 years old. I was in high school, and definitely when I was in high school, nobody was talking about AIDS at all. Not at all. It was only that Eddie Murphy recording, but my teachers, the students at the school, the principals, there was no talk of that there is an epidemic growing. And that's remarkable to think, because we are high school students. So if there's anybody who's about to have sex, and probably unsafe sex, it's us, right? So we probably should have been hearing about it, but we weren't. It wasn't until I went to college, and I went to SUNY Purchase, so this was an art school, that I began to be educated about what was happening. And so then I was going, oh, that's that thing Eddie Murphy was talking about, and by the time they would bring in speakers and things and talk to us about AIDS. And by the time I had graduated, I had started to see a couple different teachers of mine who were starting to carry the signs, coming back, 30 pounds lighter than they were the semester before, starting to lose hair, like as if they were doing chemo treatments and things like that. And still not talking about the personal, like still not having, I had one teacher who said their HIV status, but only one. The ones who were getting sick were still not revealing what was happening, but we all knew. So it was just like the unspoken terror and horror and upset that we were all carrying, but not talking about.
How did you negotiate as such a young person, also as a student and as a performer? How do you negotiate seeing so much death around you that you didn't understand fully, you didn't know what was happening exactly?
I think it was so scary that in a way, we couldn't face it. I remember I was not sexually active at the time, but I remember after a talk that the entire department was brought together at SUNY Purchase, and they had two people from It may have been Gay Men's Health Crisis, but or ACT UP. I can't remember. But they came and, they were talking about how HIV is transmitted and, putting the fear of God in us about, doing anything without. And it wasn't just condoms. I mean, this was the other thing that I think, now it kind of gets reduced to just condoms. But at that time, it was dental dams, condoms, finger condoms. I mean, there was a whole array of paraphernalia, rubber, latex paraphernalia that you need to arm yourself with before you engage in sexual activity. And don't be drunk because you're going to forget to use it, So it was that kind of terror. And I remember the person sitting across the aisle from me, a woman. She was older than me. She was maybe a junior. I was, I think, a freshman, first year student, absolutely sobbing and shaking. And the group kind of huddled around her after this talk. And she was saying to her friends, I overheard her saying, like, I think I already have it. I've done everything you're not supposed to do. I'm sure I already have it. And they're, and just seeing that like absolute terror in her, shaking, sobbing, that really stands out to me. So it was seeing that, not having been a sexual person yet. And it was only, I think, in retrospect that I realized how those two moments kind of, of course, being this horny little, teenager and seeing death associated with this thing that feels so organic and natural and that you can't help but be drawn toward. And that is a particular, I think one of the reasons that HIV/AIDS crisis interests me most is because it is a particular conflation of two, sex and death, that is very unique to that crisis. And it created a psychology that I think we are still trying to unpack the effects of, that live in the bodies and minds and hearts of the people who were in the vortex of that crisis in ways that we're almost just beginning to unpack, So yeah, it was huge. It changed my whole life, and it made me a different dancer, and it made me a different, a fraught partner, always fraught. There's no easy falling in love when you've gone through the AIDS crisis.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really sad to hear. I'm so sorry that you've gone through that. I wonder if the moments when you were performing, when you were rehearsing, or when you were fully immersed in dance, were you able to live away from this terrifying world of death and decay? Was dance a safe space for you?
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things about, and this is also what I'm reading, when I'm reading this book, The Body Keeps the Score, one of the things I've just recently read about is that when the body can act, when like physically act to do something, that it actually helps to process trauma. And so what all that dancing did was put us in action. Even if we're not doing dances about AIDS the whole time, or Bill would probably say, if ever, he didn't choreograph a dance about AIDS, quote unquote. But, it's certainly, we're living in it. And we're mobile in it, and that did a lot, I think, to help process. I think D-Man in particular is a dance that is exactly what, at least I'll speak for myself, it's exactly what I wanted to do at that time. I want to run, I want to slide, I want to beat my fist in the air, I want to catch people, I want to hold people, I want to be responsible for people's bodies and know that I can keep them safe, even if it's just in this 38 minute make-believe world. I've caught that person, they're safe, and they can keep moving on. And there's something about that for me, that was exactly what I wanted and needed to do to reconcile all of the emotions of that time.
Did the way in which people talk about HIV and AIDS change once you were a member of the Bill T. Jones Company? Did people talk about it more?
Absolutely. I mean, the Bill T. Jones Company was one of the places that was talking about it the most. And I think my most profound education came from being around that group of people at that time. Also, I mean, in terms of the time period, I mean, I graduated from college. I guess I came to New York City. I moved to New York City around 92, 93. So, and I was traveling in and out of the city all the time when I was at school. So, being in downtown New York and seeing, you would see, I feel like the kind of quintessential image was, a seemingly young man who was emaciated and moving like a 95-year-old with lesions and skeletal, with a baseball hat pulled low, and huge clothes on. Like, that was an image that really stands out in my mind as something that was kind of, you saw a lot in New York City, especially downtown. So it was like, that was on the street. And then I went into rehearsal with the Jones Zane Company. At the time that I was there, it was already public information that Bill was positive as well. I'm pausing because I'm like, is that true? But I'm pretty sure it was true. It was certainly among the company. Everyone knew and talked about it. And there were little things like, the education was so exact and refined and of a high quality that it was little things where it was like, we knew, we can be all over each other. We can sweat on each other. We can even kiss each other. We can, we can share a sandwich. Like, there's just so much normalcy. Yet if someone cut their foot or a blister popped, it was stop. Everyone stop. Don't move. Don't move. Get some latex gloves. Get the alcohol. So, you know what I mean? It was like really the level of education was so high that we understood where the boundary was, and that boundary was not messed with, right? Because we knew we had people in the room who either were HIV positive or could be, and we need to protect all of us. Also, the same thing about illness. Like, I have a cold, don't come near me, because you are protecting people who are immunodeficient in this community, in this small 10-person group, and you have to do that. Don't mess with that, because that's life or death. So it was that was the conversation, and then in 96, the protease inhibitors came out, and then it was like, whoa, it's like everything kind of shifted, because it was, in a way, the crisis kind of felt like you could exhale, but also it was like, what do we do with all of this? We've been operating with all of this. Now, what does this mean? Is it no longer life and death? Is this, can we let go? Can we not let, I think that was also confusing, as good as it was to have a drug that seemed to be working. So.
Although you have pointed out, rightfully so, that Demon in the Waters is not specifically a piece about HIV/AIDS, obviously, it's partly inspired by what was going on within the company and people in the company being ill. And something that I had not thought about that really struck me was, and I hope this isn't a spoiler. If it is a spoiler, I'll cut it. You'll let me know. But something that I found really moving and really horrifying as well and heartbreaking was there's a moment when you're talking to your students, you're talking to your company, and you're trying to find a modern parallel to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And for them, it's extremely hard to come up with something even remotely similar. How did you, let me ask you that, I don't know what I want to ask with this, but I guess, hearing the reactions, which were very honest, they talk about things like gun control, they talk about things like sexual abuse and rape on campus, they talk about things that are very specific, and you keep urging them to find something grander that unites them, and they can't seem to find anything. I find that a blessing for this generation that doesn't know this. But for you, as someone who lived through all of that, how was it to hear this, that there's nothing that they can compare it to? Like there's, when I was embarking on this project, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this was because in similar ways, obviously not the same ways, the COVID pandemic brought a lot of those feelings back about people like isolating, about people being afraid of being with people, being afraid of touching other people, being afraid of, sharing with others. So I'm not trying to guide you and have you say COVID, but have you found that there is something that they could actually compare it to? Because I was trying, I was racking my brain. I was like, I don't think there's not been anything like the HIV/AIDS epidemic.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. So I think that an important piece of the story, and that's not a spoiler, so you can keep it in, an important piece of that story background is to know the time when we were shooting, which was 2016. So COVID was nowhere in the realm of any of our imaginings. And also, I would say the gun violence epidemic, which it is an epidemic, I believe, the gun violence epidemic was not as bad as it is now. I mean, it was still, it's horrible to say that it was on the rise. It hadn't peaked yet, but yeah, it's heinous. But so I think for those two reasons, they were hard pressed to feel, as you said beautifully, I love the word urgency. And that's exactly what it felt like, what the air felt like during HIV/AIDS crisis in this country, was this sense of urgency, or at least maybe even not country, but in New York, in the New York art world, it was a sense of urgency. They felt hard pressed to find that. They were just like, what would that be? Gun violence, I guess, or, rape on campuses. Now, my frustration, and the reason why I didn't feel like, oh, this is actually a good thing, like we're in a moment of peace right now, and let's be happy about that. I wasn't happy about it because it was 2016. And we were on the precipice of allowing a, fascist, sexist, racist dictator into the office. And so, and the fact that they weren't pointing at that's what made me so upset, that none of them were seeing what could happen and ultimately did happen. We didn't know at that point that it was going to happen, but my feelings of, don't you get it? Don't you, what is it, y'all? Like, don't you see the monster that's coming and how bad it's going to be? And for them to just kind of look around and go, so that's what that was. And now I think it is a little bit of a side effect of having had Obama as president for, up till then, most of their public awareness, right? They had 8 years of Obama. So as being young people who are now aware of politics, aware of the president, aware of legislation, they had 8 years of this person who had their best interest at heart, who was in every action, or, arguably so, but in every way kind of bestowing the fact that young people, health, the arts, these are our values, folks. And so they were lulled into a kind of like, this is the way things are. And it was only Trump and Trumpism, and then COVID, and then the continued rise of gun violence. That group of students who are now professionals out in the world are very different. And they look back on them at that age and go, why didn't we speak? I can't believe we didn't. What was wrong with us? And they can't be blamed for that. They were where they were. And we were, as a country, where we are. That's, in my opinion, how Trump got elected, because we were all kind of like, oh, that won't happen here, So, yeah, I think that's why they were kind of in that complacent state. And that's why I was so felt so uncomplacent in that moment.
Thinking about COVID now and the coronavirus pandemic, how has that, if at all, shifted or changed or affected your relationship to movement? Because obviously, when we were in lockdown, you were not able to perform in public. You were not able to teach. I guess you taught on Zoom. It's clearly not the same. So how has your relationship to the way in which you move in the world changed because of that?
That's a great question. Well, it's made me really, two things which are in a way antithetical, but coexist. It's made me value live performance and live exchange so much more, and not take that for granted. Because there's nothing like it. If a dance is meant to be seen live, there's no screen rendition that can bring that art fully back to that could represent that art the way it's supposed to be. If it's a live exchange, it's meant to be a live exchange, and it has to be. So it's made me appreciate that and value that. But it's also made me value dance on screen, because we certainly saw a lot of bad dance on screen during COVID, right? Because that's all we had. We were all making it, especially in the beginning. It was just like, oh, dance on Zoom. Okay, let's try to do the best we can with Zoom choreography. But then it started to get really good, and that's thrilling, because it was like you were feeling these two art forms getting pushed together in a really short period of time. And innovators with film and dance were just leading the pack. And that's really exciting, because I feel like it has the potential now, as I'm chair of a department, so I'm in this big time. There is an opportunity now for dance, artful dance, to enter the mainstream in incredible ways and start to have commercial value and commercial worth, like yield commercial levels of money, but artfully, respectfully, and with dignity and diversity. Like, there's that potential now. And that's thrilling. So I didn't expect to be someone, because I was someone who always kind of said there's commercial and then there's art, and I definitely had a bias, toward the art thing. But I don't feel that way anymore. and that's COVID. COVID changed that. So
That's good to know.
Yeah.
I wonder, when I saw D-Man in the Waters all that time ago, I remember, and this is like, obviously you've probably heard this before from people who don't know that much about dance, and I kept thinking, how are they pulling this off? This is just like an incredible work of, athletics and just like how the body moves. But thanks to your documentary, I was also able to realize there's a whole spiritual component to the piece that I hadn't detected as an audience member, as a neophyte in the dance world when I saw it. And now I'm really curious, you've had the opportunity of going from being a fan of the piece and someone who fell in love with the piece into a researcher who dove right into the belly of the beast to go and see what was at the bottom of the piece that fascinated me. So what surprised you about the piece itself once you were directing it and once you were living in the heart of it with Bill as well?
Another great question. Well, what was beautiful is that I started to see Bill's, to understand the sensibility of the choreographer, Bill's sensibility. I felt like I started to understand that more. And that came from having to co-direct with Tom, because and Tom Hurwitz as a co-director was absolutely brilliant. I mean, we worked so well together, but this film would never have been made without him. But what that forced me to do was to understand the piece imagistically, and I'm using that word as opposed to visually, right? Because you're watching it like it's always visual, but imagistically, what are the images that are being created? And then also to understand the piece energetically. So one of the things that I learned from Tom and from watching him film dance is that he's understanding not just the image that the bodies are creating in the frame, but where is the energy, what's the trajectory of that movement? Where is it headed? And where does the camera need to be to catch that energy, which is not visual, but the camera needs to capture it. Otherwise, you don't have the dancing. You just have formal bodies in space. So that was an amazing thing to become aware of. And then that allowed me to see Bill's craft, because I was like, oh, this is the energy. This is the, it's like that the nuance of the dance or the spirit of the dance is in its energetic flow and rhythm and trajectory. And I started to see that kind of between the bodies. And so that was a beautiful thing. I felt closer to Bill. I felt like I understood him more. And I felt really capable of taking care of his work, because I felt like I was able to see that. That would be his, that would be up to him to say whether he felt I took care of it well. I think he would say yes, but so yeah, I really learned that. The other thing that I learned that didn't make the film, but is in the DVD extras, so if anybody wants to see it, you can buy the DVD, is that Damien kind of has this, and this is a beautiful aspect of the story, which I wish we could have had in the film, but we didn't. But it's almost like this eerie foretelling that D-Man in the Waters was going to be made, because there are all these pictures of Damien as a young person, Jerry Aquavella as he was before he became Damien in his later life, Jerry Aquavella in these shapes from the dance. As a little boy, he's sitting by the pool holding a beach ball. Now there's a beach ball motif in D-Man in the Waters. There's a picture of him as like a young, maybe 18, 19, standing on the beach, and his arms are outstretched like this. And that is an image that is a theme, a movement theme in D-Man in the Waters. There's a picture of him on his belly in at the beach in about, I don't know, the first kind of like, few inches of water, but he's on his belly, kind of in this belly slide shape in the water. And this is before any notion of D-Man in the Waters was in existence. And there are all these images of him. And it gave me goosebumps to almost feel like, oh my God, this was fate. This is, maybe this dance was really Damien's parting gift to the world. And his whole life was kind of moving toward the manifestation of this piece. Is it complete coincidence, or is Damien really mapped? Like if holding a beach ball, Bill is a collaborative movement maker, and that room is really, when he's in process, as I remember, when he's in process, there's a lot going in that room and he's seeing it all. He's incredibly observant. So if Damien were ever over in the corner, like with his arms in a beach ball shape, maybe Bill unconsciously picked that up. If this movement with the arms out in a V, was something that was natural to Damien to do, he's been doing it since he was a kid, on the beach. Did Bill unconsciously see that and put that in that dance? Those kinds of things. And so then Damien's being and his physical personality is written into that dance. And that becomes his, that's his memorial. That's his grave in a way, and that is beautiful to me, regardless of whether it's true. It could be my own reading, but it just made that dance even more precious.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm thinking about the piece now as both a memorial, but also an extension of Damien's life. As long as the piece is alive, he's that, young man with the beach ball, wherever the piece goes, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing that, by the way. That was such beautiful imagery, and I think it's going to bring this to a close perfectly. And I'm sorry if this is too hard of a question to answer, because I kind of sense that it is. But to the best of your abilities, can you try to sum up why is Bill's legacy so important? And if you want to talk about in terms of movement, if you want to talk about, like for someone who sees D-Man in the Waters, or someone who sees any other of his pieces, someone who watches the documentary, what in the movement is so, iconic and brilliant and moving and profound that you want to make sure it stays alive for as long as possible?
I think that if I had to say, Bill is such a prolific artist, and he has made so many dances for so many decades. And I think inherently he's not one to be able to sum up or to tie with a bow. He's dynamic, he's ever changing, he's responsive to the world to the contemporary moment at all times. However, if I really think about if there were to be a through line for me, a singular through line that D-Man is emblematic of, it would be community and human connection. And I think that, community is one of those words that's used so much. I think it really loses its resonance and its meaning. But when I think about the early duets with him and Arnie, the metaphor of a young Black man who is coming out as gay from a migrant migrant farm worker family, reaching over to grab the hand of a young Jewish man older than him, from a fairly, I would say, conservative Jewish family in Queens. That act of connecting, I think, defines why Bill is so important to our culture, because he's been doing that in all of his work. And he did it first with Arnie, fearlessly, boldly. And then, that company got bigger. And somewhere, I think, perhaps you could say in all of his works, that sense of connecting to someone else across the aisle, if you will, is in there somewhere, right? There's touch, there's communing, there's collaboration, there's community, there's coming together, there's we need each other. There's a sense of we in all of his works, and if not in it in an affirmative way, questioning it. Like in a piece like Last Supper at Uncle Tom's Cabin, he's questioning the we. Do we have it? Actually, are we? Are we a we? What happens if we're all nude and stripped down to what happens at that moment? Do we touch? Do we dare touch? Like all of those questions are in a piece like that. In a piece like Still Here, it's like, where is the moment that we convene? There are people who are the arrogant well, and there are people who are tasting mortality. What is it, the afterlife, that, there's a sense of spiritual convening? Like, I think in all of those pieces, there is both in the casting, in the movement invention, and in the deep concepts, there is the community and a critical investigation of community. And so that's why he's so important. I feel like that's, a Black artist born at the time that he was in this country, coming of age at the peak of the civil rights movement, that his work is about connection and coming together. That's an artist that we have to keep alive forever, because that tells us a tremendous amount about who we are and our survival as a nation. I think is in that, like, can we come together? So I think that's what I would say. And, again, that's just me. So there might be other dance critics, writers, philosophers, theorists who might see something else, but that's what I see.
I'm getting a sense from what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm misquoting you. I'm not going to be quoting, I'm going to be paraphrasing you and coming up with like my own. But what the sense that I'm getting is that when you are doing a piece by Bill T. Jones, you're never alone, because it's live.
Yeah. I would say that.
How People Move People is brought to you by the National Center for Choreography at the University of Akron, or NCC Akron. This podcast is produced by Jennifer Edwards. James Sleeman is our editor. Theme music by Ellis Rovin. Transcription by Arushi Singh. Cover art by Micah Kraus. I'm Eduardo Villaro, Artistic Director and CEO of Ballet Hispanico, and an NCC Akron board member. Special thanks to the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation for their continued support of NCC Akron programming like this. To learn more about NCC Akron, please visit us online at nccakron.org and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at NCC Akron. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we encourage you to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform by searching for How People Move People.